To escape the loneliness of her golden cage, tech billionaire Charlotte Hayes gave up everything to find true love. A journey that would force her to prove that a person's real worth lies not in their fortune, but in the kindness of their heart. The story begins on a splendid night, under the crystal chandeliers of the city's most luxurious ballroom. It was the 10th anniversary gala for Viridian Dynamics, the medical technology empire Charlotte had built with her own hands. At 32, she was everything one could admire. A queen of Silicon Valley with sharp beauty, an extraordinary intellect, and a colossal fortune. Dressed in a glittering evening gown, Charlotte was the center of the universe tonight, but her smile never quite reached her eyes. She felt like an expensive exhibit in a golden cage of her own making. Every relationship was tainted with calculation. The friends who surrounded her saw only an opportunity, a stepping stone to fame. But tonight, she allowed herself to hope. Her heart fluttered as Julian, her dashing boyfriend, took the stage. The ballroom fell silent, and all eyes turned to him. Charlotte held her breath, her hands clasped lightly together. She had been waiting for this moment of proposal, a sincere commitment that would shatter the icy wall around her heart. Julian took the microphone, his smile captivating as he looked directly at Charlotte. "Ladies and gentlemen," he began, his voice resonant, "I want to say a few words to the most amazing woman I've ever known, Charlotte Hayes." Hope flared brightly within her. "This is it. Charlotte, you are a phenomenal person," Julian continued. "Brilliant, talented, and powerful." He paused, and the smile on his lips vanished. And that is precisely the problem. The air in the ballroom seemed to freeze. The smile on Charlotte's face died. "I once thought I could walk beside you." Julian's voice turned cold, distant. "But I can't stand living in the shadow of such a powerful woman. So, in front of everyone, I want to say, we're done." A wave of shocked gasps erupted through the room. Instantly, hundreds of phones were raised, flashes flickering relentlessly like 1,000 daggers aimed straight at Charlotte, exposing her pain to the world. Humiliation, shame, and devastation washed over her, threatening to drown her. Julian stepped off the stage, walking past her coolly as if she were a stranger. Amidst the whispers and curious stares, Charlotte stood utterly alone. Her triumphant anniversary gala had, in an instant, become the stage for the most bitter failure of her life. In the days following that fateful night, Charlotte locked herself away in her penthouse. Its terrifying silence was a stark contrast to the storm raging across the media. She turned off her phone and disconnected from the internet, but the venomous headlines and the image of her own frozen smile haunted her. One morning, she stood before the large mirror in her walk-in closet, where hundreds of expensive outfits hung. She looked at her reflection, a woman who had everything, yet was completely empty. "What do you really have, Charlotte?" she whispered to herself. "Power? Money? Or an empty heart and a list of people ready to use you?" The truth hit her like a slap. She realized that if she continued to live in this world, she would forever be a commodity, priced by stocks and contracts. She needed to get out. No, not a vacation. An escape. The next day, Charlotte called an emergency board meeting. She walked into the conference room, her expression calm but resolute, and faced the most powerful figures at Viridian Dynamics. "Ladies and gentlemen," she began, her voice clear and firm, "I will be taking a temporary leave of absence from my position as CEO for 6 months, effective next week." The room erupted in murmurs. Mr. Sterling, an elderly major shareholder, was the first to object. 6 months? Charlotte? That's unthinkable. Do you have any idea how the market will react? The stock will plummet? Daniel, her vice president and most trusted colleague, spoke with concern. Charlotte, I understand you're under immense pressure, but leaving now is too risky. Perhaps we should. There are no perhapses, Daniel, Charlotte interrupted, her gaze fixed on him, both trusting and final. It's because I know Viridian dynamics better than anyone that I know this is necessary. A machine needs maintenance, and so do I. I trust you to steer this ship brilliantly. She turned to the entire board. This is not a discussion. This is an announcement. Silence fell over the room. The authority in her voice had silenced all opposition. Returning home, Charlotte began to execute her plan. She wouldn't disguise herself as a poor person. That's just another role to play, she told herself, scrolling past articles about billionaires who went undercover to test people. I'm so tired of acting. I just want to be real. To learn how to live like a normal person, she sold her supercar, locked all her jewelry in a bank vault, and packed a few simple cotton outfits into an old backpack. On the day she left, only her longtime assistant saw her to the door. Miss Hayes, are you absolutely sure about this? The assistant asked, her voice filled with worry. If you need anything at all. Charlotte placed a hand on her shoulder, smiling genuinely for the first time in days. Thank you, but this time, I want to figure it out on my own. Driving her newly purchased economy car out of the city, Charlotte watched the skyscrapers shrink in her rearview mirror. A breathtaking feeling of fear and freedom washed over her. For the first time in over a decade, the road ahead was completely unknown, and she had no map. Her journey to learn how to live had truly begun. Charlotte drove aimlessly for days. She headed toward the sunrise, leaving the shadows of the city and her old life behind. She passed through small towns and sprawling fields, but no place beckoned her to stay. Until one afternoon, when the salty scent of the sea began to drift through her car window, she knew she had found it. Her destination was Starlight Cove, a small coastal town that seemed forgotten by the modern world. There were no skyscrapers or luxury boutiques here, only pastel-painted wooden houses, small shops with weathered signs, and a rustic pier where fishing boats bobbed gently on the waves. She parked in front of a small cafe with a for rent sign in the window. Inside, a kind-faced old woman with silver hair smiled at her. "Hello, dear. What can I get for you?" "Hi. I saw the sign for a rental. I'm looking for a place to stay." "For a while," Charlotte said, trying to keep her voice casual. "Oh, what luck." "I have a small cottage on the hill, overlooking the sea. It's a little old, but very peaceful." The woman led her to see the house. The cottage was just as she described, small and rustic, with the intermingled scents of pine and sea breeze. It was the complete opposite of her splendid but soulless penthouse. Standing on the porch, gazing out at the vast blue ocean stretching to the horizon, Charlotte felt a weight lift from her chest for the first time in a long, long time. "I'll take it," she said without hesitation. "My name is Charlie." "Charlie," the old woman repeated with a warm smile. "That's a lovely name. Welcome to Starlight Cove." After settling in, Charlotte realized she needed something to do. She couldn't just stare at the ocean all day. During a walk along the shore, she stumbled upon the Starlight Cove Marine Conservation Center. It was a small, humble facility with a few tanks and an exhibit area for children. A neatly written sign hung on the door, "Part-time guide needed." Without a second thought, she walked in. The woman in charge, named Clara, looked her up and down with a skeptical eye. "Do you have any experience in this field?" Clara asked bluntly. "No," Charlotte answered honestly, but I'm a very fast learner and I really love the ocean. Clara raised an eyebrow, unconvinced. This job isn't just smiling and walking around. You'll have to clean tanks, prepare food for the animals, and answer 100 questions from curious kids. The pay isn't great, either. I don't mind hard work, Charlotte insisted, her voice filled with a sincerity that surprised even herself. Please, just give me a chance. Perhaps the eagerness in Charlie's eyes convinced Clara. She sighed. All right, 1 week trial. Be here at 8 a.m. tomorrow. Don't be late. That evening, Charlotte sat alone in her cottage. For the first time in her life, she cooked herself a simple dinner of pasta and sauce from the local grocery store. No private chef, no housekeeper. Just her and the sound of the waves murmuring outside. A pang of loneliness struck her, but it was different from the isolation of her penthouse. This was the loneliness of a new beginning, a necessary quiet that allowed her to hear her own thoughts. Tomorrow, she would start her first job without using the name Charlotte Hayes. She was just Charlie, a trainee guide, and for some reason, that made her smile. Charlotte's new life in Starlight Cove slowly settled into a peaceful rhythm. During the day, she was busy at the conservation center, finding an unexpected joy in scrubbing tanks and telling stories about sea turtles to children. But when the sun set and the town grew quiet, loneliness would creep back into her cottage. She realized she needed more than work. She needed connection. So one evening, when she saw a flyer for the Wednesday night social dance class at the community center, she decided to give it a try. The community center was a world away from the lavish ballrooms she was used to. The wooden floor was worn. A tinny sound system played a lively salsa tune, and everyone, from teenagers to middle-aged couples, was laughing and chatting in casual clothes. Charlotte, or Charlie, felt a little out of place and awkward. She stood in a corner, clumsily trying to mimic the steps. Suddenly, a deep, warm voice spoke beside her ear. Don't think so much. Just let the music move you. She turned. It was Ethan, the dance instructor. He was tall, with the lean, muscular build of a dancer and a brilliant smile that could melt any reservation. He gently placed a hand on her waist, taking her other hand in his. Relax your shoulders, he whispered, guiding her to the rhythm. 1, 2, 3. See? You've got a natural talent. Under Ethan's guidance, Charlotte's body began to loosen up. For the first time in years, she moved not to impress anyone, but simply for the joy of it. When the class ended, Ethan offered her a glass of lemonade. I haven't seen you here before, he said, that smile still on his face. Charlie, right? Definitely not a local. I just moved here, Charlotte replied, feeling a pleasant warmth spread through her chest. I was looking for a change. Well, you came to the right place, Ethan winked. They began to see each other more often after class, sometimes for coffee, sometimes for walks along the beach. Ethan told her about his passion, his dream of opening a professional dance studio that could inspire the whole town. Charlotte listened, captivated. She saw in him a fire and enthusiasm she rarely encountered in the men of her world. She started to believe that maybe, in this place, she could actually find a genuine connection. That hope lasted exactly 3 weeks. One evening, Ethan invited her to dinner at the nicest restaurant in town. He wore a stylish button-down shirt, a far cry from his usual casual attire. So, Charlie, he began after they had finished their main course, his tone more serious. I feel like we have a special connection, and I can tell you're a very sharp, sophisticated woman. Charlotte smiled, her heart beating a little faster. Thank you, Ethan. That's why I want to share this with you, he continued, pulling a folder from his briefcase. He slid it across the table. This is the business plan for the studio I told you about, perfected down to the last detail. Location, design, marketing strategy. The only problem, as you know, is funding. The smile vanished from Charlotte's lips. She looked down at the folder, then back up at Ethan. His eyes no longer held pure admiration. They held the expectant gaze of a salesman. I don't understand, Ethan. Why are you showing me this? Ethan laughed, a calculated sound. Oh, come on, Charlie. I don't know your story, but I know potential when I see it. You're not like the other people here. A small initial investment, say $50,000, to get the project off the ground. For someone like you, that's nothing, right? Think of it as a partnership. We'd be the perfect couple, in business and in. Charlotte didn't hear the rest. A familiar chill ran down her spine. There it was again. The numbers, the plans, the investments. Even as Charlie, a part-time employee, people could still somehow sniff out her potential for being used. She gently pushed the folder back. Ethan, I think you've misunderstood, she said, her voice calm but distant. I came to Starlight Cove to find a simple life, not a business opportunity. Thank you for dinner. She stood up and left, leaving a stunned Ethan sitting at the table. As she stepped out of the restaurant, the cold sea breeze felt no colder than the ice in her heart. That night, Charlotte sat alone on her porch, staring out at the endless ocean. The loneliness felt worse than the night Julian had left her. She had given up everything: money, power, fame, yet they seemed to be an invisible ghost that haunted her, defining how others saw her. Charlotte came to a bitter realization. No matter where she ran, no matter how normal she tried to be, to many people, she would never be just a person. She would only be an opportunity. In the wake of these disappointments, a bitter weariness settled over Charlotte. She erected an invisible wall around herself, resolving not to open her heart to anyone again. She threw herself into her work at the conservation center as a means of escape, caring for the silent sea creatures. Creatures that didn't demand, judge, or calculate became the only balm for her soul. She found peace in simple, manual tasks: scrubbing large tanks, preparing meals for the turtles, or quietly observing a tiny seahorse drifting in the water. It was during these withdrawn days that she began to notice Caleb. He wasn't new. Caleb had worked there for a long time, but due to their different schedules and Charlotte's self-imposed isolation, they had rarely crossed paths. He was a marine biologist who spent most of his time conducting research offshore or working in the lab at the back of the center. The first time Charlotte truly saw him was one morning when a group of elementary school students came for a tour. She was in the back preparing turtle food when she heard a warm, passionate voice. She looked up to see Caleb kneeling in the middle of a circle of children, his eyes sparkling with enthusiasm as he told them about the journey of a baby sea turtle. Did you know, he said, his hands mimicking the shape of a swimming turtle, that this little hatchling, as soon as it breaks out of its egg, has to face the entire vast ocean all by itself? With no parents to show the way, it still knows exactly where to swim. That's instinct, one of nature's miracles. The children listened without blinking, completely captivated by his story. Charlotte watched from a distance. Caleb was unlike anyone she had ever met. He wore a faded t-shirt and a pair of khaki shorts, dotted with a few stains. His hair was slightly messy from the sea wind, and his skin was tan from long days under the sunday. He didn't have Julian's polished look or Ethan's calculated smile. He exuded a raw authenticity and a pure love for his work. After the children left, Caleb walked over to Charlotte's area to grab some tools. He saw her and smiled, a natural, unadorned smile. "Hey, you're Charlie, right?" he asked, his voice still warm from his talk with the kids. Charlotte was a little startled. She nodded. "Yes, that's me. I'm Caleb. Thanks for getting the food ready for the turtles." "They look like they're enjoying it," he said, then turned to his task, not asking a single question about who she was, where she came from, or what she did for a living. That lack of interest, ironically, was what impressed Charlotte the most. For the first time, she had met a man whose curiosity wasn't directed at her, but at the work, at the creatures they both cared for. He didn't sniff out anything in her. To him, she was simply Charlie, the new colleague. From that day on, she began to observe him more. She saw him engrossed in his work for hours in the lab, patiently explaining the harm of plastic waste to visitors and quietly mending an old net. He lived a simple, passionate, and meaningful life. And in his small world, there seemed to be no room for calculations of money or status. Slowly, the defensive walls Charlotte had painstakingly built began to crack. In the following days, interactions between Charlotte and Caleb remained sparse, but their quality changed. He never asked about her past or commented on her appearance. Instead, his acknowledgement came in very different ways. Once, as she was struggling to fix the pump for a small tank, Caleb walked by. Instead of doing it for her, he just stood and watched for a moment. "Try turning the pressure valve counterclockwise," he suggested. "It tends to get stuck there." Charlotte followed his advice, and the pump whirred back to life. He simply nodded in satisfaction. "Nice work," he said, and walked away. That brief compliment, focused on her ability rather than anything else, was worth more than 1,000 flowery words she had ever heard. She realized Caleb was watching her, not with curiosity, but with the respect of a colleague. He didn't seem to care who she was, where she came from, or what secrets she held. He only valued Charlie, the woman who arrived earliest and left latest, who could spend hours patiently scrubbing algae off a turtle shell, and whose eyes lit up when she talked about the sea. However limited her knowledge, to him, her worth was in what she did, not the name she carried. The real turning point came late one afternoon, as a storm began to brew. The center received an urgent call from a local fisherman. They had spotted a large sea turtle entangled in a ghost net, a discarded fishing net left to drift in the ocean, becoming a deadly trap. He said it's near Seagull Point, and the animal is very weak, Caleb said quickly to Clara, already grabbing a rescue kit. "I need one more person." No one else was there but Charlotte. She stepped forward without hesitation. "I'll go." Caleb looked at her, a flicker of doubt in his eyes. "The waves are rough out there. This won't be easy." "I know. But I can help," she affirmed, her gaze steady. Caleb said no more. He just nodded and tossed her a life jacket. The center's small boat crashed over the white-capped waves. The wind whipped at their faces, and cold sea spray soaked them both. When they arrived, the sight was heartbreaking. A massive sea turtle, perhaps 100 years old, was struggling desperately in a thick tangle of nylon mesh. The net had cut deep into one of its flippers, causing a gruesome wound. "Hold it steady!" Caleb yelled over the roar of the waves. "I'll secure the boat. You use this knife to cut the main lines." Charlotte summoned all her strength, one hand gripping the turtle's slippery shell, while the other carefully worked the sharp blade under the taut lines. The terrified animal thrashed violently, nearly knocking her overboard, but she held on. She saw the pain in its ancient eyes, and that gave her strength. For nearly an hour, they worked as one. There were no wasted words, only Caleb's short commands and Charlotte's seamless coordination. He held, she cut. He pulled, she untangled. Sweat, tears, and seawater mingled on her face. Finally, the last strand was severed. The giant turtle, freed, dove deep into the dark blue water and disappeared. They both collapsed onto the floor of the boat, breathless, exhausted, and drenched. Silence, only the sound of the sea and the whistling wind. Then Caleb turned to look at her, and for the first time, Charlotte saw something different in his eyes, a deep and genuine admiration. He didn't say thank you. He just reached out and gently brushed a wet strand of hair from her cheek. In that moment, under the fading light of sunset, Charlotte had a revelation. Love, real connection, didn't come from fancy words at glamorous parties, from promises of mutual benefit, or from flattery about her fame. It came from this. From the moment two people fought together for something bigger than themselves, it came from actions, not words. The weeks following the sea turtle rescue were the happiest Charlotte had ever known. The wall of ice between her and Caleb had melted, replaced by a quiet but profound bond. They didn't need declarations of love. Their affection was shown in the simple lunches they shared on the pier, the knowing glances they exchanged at work, and the walks they took on the beach after closing, where Caleb would point out different seabirds and explain the changing tides. Charlotte had completely forgotten who she was. She was Charlie, the girl who loved the sea, who found joy in the small things, and who was slowly learning to trust in a love with no strings attached. For the first time in her life, she felt seen and valued for who she truly was. She had let her guard down completely, and that's when disaster struck. It started like any other morning. Charlotte woke to the sound of birdsong and the smell of coffee she'd brewed herself. But when she stepped out of her cottage to head to work, she noticed something was off. The old woman who owned the house, who usually waved to her each morning, now just stared with a look of curiosity mixed with apprehension. A few neighbors who were gathered and whispering fell silent when they saw her. A sense of unease grew inside her. When she went to the small grocery store to pick up a few things, she understood why. On the newsstand, splashed across the front page of a notorious tabloid, was her face. A paparazzi photo of her scrubbing a tank at the center, sweat beading on her forehead. Next to it was an old, glamorous, and powerful photo of Charlotte Hayes at a product launch. The headline was merciless: The Secret Double Life of Billionaire Charlotte Hayes in a Sleepy Fishing Village. Her heart stopped. Her entire world collapsed in that single moment. Her phone, the cheap one she'd bought when she arrived, began buzzing incessantly with calls from her assistant, from the board. But she didn't care about them. There was only one name in her mind: Caleb. She rushed to the conservation center. The scene was chaotic. Several unfamiliar cars were parked outside, clearly belonging to photographers. Inside, Clara and her other colleagues looked at her with an indescribable expression. She ran toward the lab, where she knew Caleb would be. She found him standing motionless in the middle of the room, holding a tablet displaying that very article. His face was devoid of its usual warmth. It was as cold as ice, hardened with anger and profound disappointment. "Caleb," she breathed, her voice breaking. I can explain." He looked up at her, and his gaze was a physical blow. It was the look of a complete stranger. "Explain?" he said, his voice low and sharp. "Explain what? That the name Charlie was a lie? That these past few months were just a game for you? A little vacation for a bored billionaire? No, it wasn't like that. Charlotte stepped forward, tears welling in her eyes. Charlie is who I really am, the person you know. The person I know is a hard-working, simple woman. He cut her off, his voice tight with anger. The woman on this screen is the CEO of Viridian Dynamics, a multi-billion-dollar corporation. They are not the same person. He swiped the tablet off furiously. Do you have any idea what people like you, what corporations like yours do? Charlotte was stunned. The beach where I grew up, Caleb continued, his voice now trembling with a long-suppressed pain. It used to be the most beautiful place on earth. Until a massive corporation came, built a factory, and dumped its waste into the sea. They destroyed it. They killed the ecosystem. They killed a part of my childhood, all for profit. They called it progress. He looked her straight in the eye, his own filled with the hurt of someone who had been utterly betrayed. I've spent my entire life hating the super rich, hating the way they treat the world like their personal playground. And I was stupid enough to believe you were different. I let you into my life, while you were just playing a part. Caleb, please. Don't say my name, he said, turning his back on her, a final, brutal gesture. The game is over, Miss Hayes. Go back to your world, and please just leave me alone. Caleb had turned his back on her, and Charlotte's world fell silent once more. But this time, the silence didn't paralyze her. The pain was still there, sharp and aching, but beneath it lay a fierce determination she hadn't known she possessed. She had found something worth fighting for, someone worth proving everything to. She wasn't giving up. 2 days later, she went to Caleb's small house at the end of the coastal road. He was sitting on the porch mending an old net, his face etched with exhaustion and misery. When he saw her, he shot to his feet, his eyes cold. What else do you want, Miss Hayes? He used her surname like a weapon, a wall between them. I'm not here to explain with words anymore, Charlotte said, her voice trembling but resolute. I'm here to show you. Please, just give me 1 hour. That's all I ask. After that, if you still want me to leave, I'll never bother you again. Something in her pleading eyes, an undeniable sincerity, made Caleb hesitate. He stared at her for a long moment, then gave a reluctant nod. 1 hour. Charlotte said nothing more, quietly leading him to her car. She drove out of town and onto a rough, little-known dirt road that led to a secluded cove shielded by rocky cliffs. There, nestled among the trees, was a small, unassuming research facility. It had no flashy signs, just a few large tanks and a modest laboratory. As they walked in, an older scientist with white hair greeted them with a smile. Miss Hayes, what a surprise to see you here. Caleb froze. He knew this man. It was Dr. Samuel Finch, one of the most respected marine biologists in the world. Charlotte turned to Caleb, her heart pounding. I founded this trust 5 years ago, under a different name. No one knows where the funding comes from, she explained, her voice soft. We study coral reef restoration and the rescue and breeding of endangered sea turtle species. I don't do this for publicity. It's not a PR tool for Viridian Dynamics. I do it because I love the ocean and because I believe that those who have the means have a responsibility to protect it. She pointed toward the crystal-clear tanks where young coral reefs were growing and hundreds of baby turtles were swimming freely. This, she said, her voice choked with emotion as she looked directly into Caleb's eyes, laying her soul bare. This is the real me, not those glossy magazine articles. Caleb was speechless. He looked from the dedicated research to the esteemed doctor, and back to the woman standing before him. The anger and prejudice inside him slowly crumbled, replaced by an overwhelming sense of emotion. He had been wrong. He had let the pain of his past blind him. This woman wasn't just a billionaire. She was Charlie, his hard-working colleague, and she was also the person who had been secretly using her fortune to do the exact things he had dedicated his life to. She was a woman with a kind heart. He stepped forward, the distance between them no longer a chasm. Why didn't you tell me? Because for the first time in my life, Charlotte said, tears streaming down her cheeks, I wanted someone to see me, not my money. Caleb gently reached out and wiped away her tears, a gesture as tender as the one on the boat that day. I'm so sorry, he whispered. The story closes on a brilliant sunset. On the empty beach, Charlotte and Caleb released the baby turtles from her project onto the sand. They knelt side by side, silently watching, as the tiny, tenacious creatures scrambled with all their might toward the vast ocean where they belonged. As the last turtle disappeared into the golden shimmering waves, Caleb gently took Charlotte's hand. They said nothing, simply smiling at each other. The sunset enveloped them, not as a symbol of an end, but of a new beginning. A love that had been tested by the storm and had found its safe harbor in sincerity.